record on this computer, so we are now recording. So good evening to everyone. This is it, the end of 800. And obviously you're going to be sick of looking at that iceberg, what it is. But what I want to do is basically tonight, I'm going to throw out a series of questions to you. And what I'd like you to do collectively is just, talk about these questions of what I have out there. And then, I will, ask more questions as you discuss what was going on in relationship to particularly your final project. And then it will give me a little bit of insight that when I look at your projects that it will help me to understand what you did there. So with that, let me get over here. What we're going to do is obviously what I was getting you to look at now is this whole concept of leadership, the common elements of it in terms of the strategies that you've read, and that collective challenge. What I wanted you to really begin to look at is changes in K-12 higher ed and also businesses organizations. The reason I put business organizations in there is that sometimes, we do in the cohorts get business people in those cohorts. And even as educators, whether you're K-12 or you're in higher ed, obviously you're preparing human beings to function in some type of business environment, whether it be entrepreneurial, types of environments, or whether it be, quote, traditional approaches to organizations and the impact of that technology. So that's why I kind of give you the broad spectrum to look at that. And then really how the applications, particularly of sustainability and systems thinking and adaptive change, really impact your thinking about leadership. So that's what the assignment was about and what you were looking at. So first of all, then, really the first question I want to pose to you is that really as you now reflect upon this, and you think about the course content, and again, I'm looking at systems thinking, adaptive change, and visioning, plus other things that you were exposed to, how did you develop really your final project, putting that together? What was going on as you looked at the content of trying to put this together in a way in which it would represent what your team was thinking?
Well, I can start. I'm one of those few that have the business background, so I spent over 30 years at IBM as a mid-level manager. And when I first read the business aspect of this project, it immediately brought me to global workforce. Mm-hmm. So being at IBM, we mostly worked onshore with local resources, although we're distributed throughout the country, and we're used to having web meetings and telecoms and such. But then the execs got the idea that since human resources are so inexpensive in India, we could actually afford 5 Indian employees for every 1 US. So yes, there's a time zone change and there's a cultural change, but you could lose a lot in efficiency for 5 people to 1 US, because when you include the salary, the burden rate, the benefits and all that, that's what it turned out to be. So then I started thinking, using what I learned in the class all about adaptive change and how it didn't work. I'll give you the punchline was it really didn't work, and it was more than a time zone change, because these individuals, they were all, college educated, and they had their own career goals. And whereas the U.S. management just wanted them to fulfill a certain role, if you go off and do this one thing, you just test, we'll write the software, the code, you go test it and tell us, if you find any bugs. That wasn't satisfactory for them. They had their own aspirations. Mm-hmm. And in the U.S., we weren't adaptive, thinking about how the others were people too. We can just farm out this work and have them, turn the crank and get an output back, and then, everything is good. So we didn't understand really their culture. They didn't really understand our culture. We didn't understand their aspirations. They didn't understand what we wanted. You know, they had their own goals. So after, you know, a few years, I guess we pretty much abandoned it and had, you know, just a shell in India with their own mission. So I was thinking about how could we have made this work? And I think if we had taken a step back, you know, on the balcony and said, oh yeah, this is, you know, we need to bring the teams together. We need to have some shared experiences, shared learning. Maybe there's a new project we could give to both teams so they work on it together. You know, we can get, you know, a final product.
So and what you did is then you ended up with Watson. It's going to take over.
Yeah, that wasn't too much in India, though.
True. So other thoughts? Very good. Thank you.
I learned how much all the separate aspects of leadership that we've been working through really work together to help facilitate each other. So the vision is necessary to get people to understand the why behind the change, the bigger system itself, and how every piece of it plays off of and facilitates every other piece of it, and how they influence each other moving forward is necessary to think about. And getting collaborative buy-in, earning, I guess, credibility by using small wins and getting people to see the value of the change, and how all of those parts all are relational. They're all based on people. They're all based on trust and working in a system together for a common good. And it's sort of the ethereal before this class, just sort of, yes, of course, you need a good leader to make sense of things and drive, but it's an arbitrary and sort of without legs kind of concept. But having worked through the iceberg gave me a better structure of how to think in terms of process and the pieces and how they work together. Having that as a framework gave me a good understanding of what the situation really was. Because I think at any given meeting, any given moment, we were talking in our group about e-learning and online texts. So in any given part of the change process that I experienced in my actual work life, I was seeing a piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really understand how those pieces worked together. It was just because of my position, I was part of this conversation and this conversation. And there wasn't a sort of big district-wide, hey, this is why we're doing this kind of sense, and how all those parts play together. So actually doing this helped me understand why we did what we did when we were rolling it out the way we did.
So what I'm hearing you say is that to one extent, your understanding of a system is what Sengi basically, and I think one of the videos he was talking there about that, he even hates the word system, because really what it is a network of relationships among people.
Yeah.
And that's basically what you said, that what you're experiencing now is understanding the connectiveness throughout an entire system, which then creates the whole. And it's just, you can't just focus on a part of it. You need to understand the whole structure of it.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, good.
And I agree with that, because in my work in higher education, everybody, I don't want to say everybody, but a lot of areas, they're so focused on their own area, but they don't realize that connecting can make whatever we are trying to do much better. Instead of just staying in our areas, we each can contribute, and we each should contribute, because we have a part of what we're trying to do. For example, we have a new strategic plan coming up, and we're trying to collaborate on a lot of things and have different areas come together. So I agree with the last comment about just knowing how all pieces, all parts how we all come together and fit together instead of staying in our own area and focusing on our own area. We're much more successful when we come together and we work for the vision, the one goal. And so I feel like I've learned a lot about that as well. And I just have a different view myself, even not trying to stay in my own area, seeing the benefits of collaborating and working together.
So when Sengi talks about that one of the core components, and if you remember, he uses the stool, the three-legged stool, that crossing boundaries is extremely important to move into the area of what I guess everyone calls the learning organization. That if you don't cross boundaries, then your silos are just going to keep us from reaching ultimately what we want to do collectively. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Other thoughts about this question?
I think one of the things that I kind of picked up on it, and I forget who said this, but one of the texts, I believe it said, lead your life as a lead, or run your life as a leadership laboratory or something. And I really started to see how, the organization that I'm in has been impacted by really, a succession of leadership that has been implementing quick fixes, and how it's kind of really made us, a bit dysfunctional in how we kind of approach things, and we do have those silos, and there isn't collaboration across boundaries. And we've articulated that before. One of the biggest concerns that have come from employees at the school that I'm at is that we don't know where we're going. We don't know why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, obviously we're a community college, so we understand that in general, but there's no specific leadership, there's no specific goal, there's no articulation of what it is that we're doing besides the fact that we need students, we need money. They can tell us that till they're blue in the face, but beyond that we've really kind of suffered from a succession of leadership that probably through no fault of their own is getting a bunch of different problems coming at them from every different direction, and is just slapping band-aids on them. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really given me a better understanding of where how my environment specifically functions, and hopefully a little bit more about how I could, at least within student affairs, kind of work to combat that.
So let me ask you then, as you think about that, and
mm-hmm.
as you're relating it to the reality of your life,
mm-hmm.
and jump back to this, how did it impact you individually in developing your final project?
I use some examples from my specific experiences with declining. We talked about declining enrollment and online education, and how, my school really hasn't embraced the online, world as much as it should have. So, specific to the final project, I used what I think is a pretty good example of the iceberg with declining enrollment, and saying that, they were just kind of focused on still going after those first-time, full-time students. They weren't employing, they weren't looking at, returning adult students. They weren't looking at online students besides, the students that we already have that were really looking maybe to take an online class, mixed in with their other courses. So, I think that, the understanding of how we've really just kind of gotten stuck in our ways of, when we were fat in the, the late 2000s with more students than we knew what to do with, nobody was worried about where our students were coming from.
Right.
Now I feel like we're still thinking, well, we're trying to squeeze blood from a stone almost at this point.
So are you very concerned about student success and retention? That's a problem that we're having, that I spoke about in my paper, because I think that's really like an unethical thing to kind of pass them along, sort of have them withdraw and then have them come back. It's like a negative feedback loop,
Uh-huh.
and so that's where we are. Our enrollment is hugely down. People are getting fired, and it's all about retention. So we are to take these students and we're to make them successful and sort of not, our rates of attrition are too high, apparently.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge problem that we have, is that we get the butts in the seats, but then the effort after that part is lacking a little bit. And again, when we had first-time, full-time students coming right from high school that were looking to transfer in 2 years, they kind of drove their own way through.
Right.
But now that we have started attracting other types of students that maybe need a bit more support, I feel like we are starting to kind of lose them in terms of after their first semester, after their first year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Good. So let me move to the second question, because you'll see that these are integrated together. So when you look at the project and basically your reflective conversation teams, what did you learn from working in a team environment during the design process of putting together, this final project, or other types of things that you were discussing, whether it be videos or the readings, etc. So how did teaming come about for all of you? And what was it like? And what were the ups and downs of it?
Dr. Gould, if I could start, even though you can't see me on video. My team was very good, Sherry, Deb, and Kathy. We worked very well together, and I think the cool part of what we ended up doing in our project was telecommuting and distance learning. And the funny thing is a lot of that is predicated off of technology, which I think helped our team to work better together. We used Slack as a communication channel, so we didn't have so many emails, so many texts, all that kind of stuff coming in. We centralized that. And then we used Google Docs and Google Slides to collaboratively work. I'll just pick on Sherry. Sherry likes to work late at night. Some of us like to work earlier in the mornings. So it was able to work on everybody's schedule, and it really didn't cause any rifts. There was no weird dynamics. We just kind of worked and ebbed and flow with our strengths and weaknesses.
So the structure of the technology was able to accommodate the different styles within the group.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say setting that up early was ideal, because we didn't have to see a problem, then try to find the solution. We anticipated the possible problems and went from there.
Okay.
Caleb was the tech person, so it really worked out well. So he was the tech. Mm-hmm.
Good. Others about teaming.
I think it was helpful to, we talked at the beginning about, I think, and throughout the course, about the different assumptions that we have, that we operate under, and working with folks from not only just different institutions or different settings, but also just different parts of the country. It helped me, I think, to really kind of slow down and think about the assumptions that I was making, because we don't all have the same type of understanding about the work that we're doing or what different structures mean. And so it really helps me to kind of slow down and think about how I can explain things in ways that would be helpful for my team members to understand about, what my experience was. And I really appreciated the questions and the ways that we were able to talk about our experiences. And it kind of it helped me to identify kind of areas where, I might think that everything it's the same, or that in a particular context, that everyone would have the same idea, and that's not true. And so I appreciated just seeing that in a very obvious way, working with the groups, and working in my group, and just learning from the different experiences that we've all had, the professional experiences that we have had, and how that connects to the course content.
So what I'm hearing you say then, to one extent, by listening to each other's differences and understanding those differences, that led to better collaboration?
Yeah, and I think differences in different work experiences. And so especially as we've we've talked about, different things that we are going, whether it's, the structure of our departments that we work for or different challenges that come up in our work. What I found most helpful was kind of the questions, especially in my own experience, like being able to talk about what I do in my job and maybe some challenges that come up, the type of questions that group members asked about, why is this, why is something structured a certain way, or why is something set up a certain way? Things that I would just kind of take for granted, I guess. It was really helpful to be able to think about that. And, it was really obvious that those are things now moving forward as I'm talking, the way that I'm thinking about my experience is not to assume that everyone's going to have the same understanding.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that to one extent, the members of the team allowed for the surfacing of the mental models of the group to emerge as it relates to the structure of their daily living, i.e. work.
Yes.
So for example, your background in terms of work is what?
Higher education and residence life.
Okay. So, and did you have K-12 people in your group?
Yes.
So the difference in understanding that then was very important to get those surfaced out there so you could understand those, even though you're a product of the K-12 environment.
Right.
Okay. Okay, cool. Good. Other thoughts about this?
I enjoyed working with my group because we have people who work in K through 12, business background, also higher education, and even community college, Chris. And so we have some of the same challenges, different schools, different areas. So it's good to hear, wow, we're not in it alone. And then also to see how his school may be handling something, or how we are handling something on this end. So it's really good to be able to talk to someone else about that, to see what they're going through and how they're handling that. And like I said, same issues, different school, but same issues.
Okay. All right. So in thinking about that, what were some of the problems that emerged in working in a team?
I will say that I had this is my first, other than one class in grad school, this is my first experience with online education.
Mm-hmm.
And the same things that made me nervous about, not nervous, but the same concerns I had about starting a program online were kind of the same concerns I had with teamwork. You don't have them in your face once a week to kind of see you and remind you. So you kind of got to stay a little bit more diligent about making sure you're communicating and, establishing hard deadlines and things like that. So, although we were meeting once a week in our, online discussion groups, it wasn't the same with the face-to-face that, it kind of, you've got to stay on top of making sure you're communicating, making sure you're collaborating in a different way using technology, which was new for me and was a bit of a learning curve.
So how's that curve going?
I'm definitely getting there. I'm definitely, we're not done yet, but, but it's, I feel much more confident now than I did kind of when we started. And, and the same thing, I'll echo, quickly, the same comments, that it was good to have camaraderie and good to have shared experiences, but it was the same thing that made me a little nervous about an online class is what made me a little nervous about working in a team online, that, you just really got to make sure you stay on top of yourself and you're communicating more so than you might have had to do in a face-to-face course.
But what you're telling me is, though, that at least you're open to it because, and I'm going to make the assumption that the experience you've had, at least with the team that you were in, has helped to dissipate some of that fear.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
100%.
Okay. All
I
right.
think sometimes it's just that everybody has their own schedule and their own life and their own kids and their
Mhm.
jobs, and Caleb is taking 2 classes, and so just trying to find the time, like one time that worked for everybody. That was probably the only problem we had. I mean, we chat all during the day, on Slack. It's just always popping up. So we used that, and that really was a time saver. I've done other projects where there was always a weak member and you end up doing their share, but we didn't have that. The only problem that we had was that everybody's really busy, especially now it's finals week. We're all educators.
Yep.
So we're all sort of jammed up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah, go ahead. Go.
I think, and again, sorry you can't see me because I'm kind of driving around doing a million things, taking advantage of the asynchronous learning, but I think we all gravitated towards the online class because we're all busy.
But we see your picture, so that counts.
Yeah, good enough. That's probably much better than what you'd actually be seeing right now. But, I enjoyed working with our group. I think personalities also come through even in just, you could tell who the type A personalities are. They're the ones that are sending out the list of group, here's the things that we have to do. And, someone like myself who is a little more passive, I appreciate that. And, like I said, I think our group worked well together.
Okay, good. So let me move into the next question then. So, so throughout this course, then, what did you discover about your leadership development? Because obviously, this is a course to introduce you into core concepts around leadership. You were given a framework for thinking about it, the iceberg. Obviously, you also gave the other metaphor that was dealing with the dance floor and the balcony. You had Fullen's work. You had, Akoff in terms of looking at schools, et cetera. So as you think about this now, what really are you discovering at this particular point in your own leadership development? And more importantly, how's it impacting your real work?
Dr. Gould, for me, it was really the articulation of leadership. So I understand my, strengths, weaknesses, kind of the awareness that I have of my leadership capabilities and skills, but to be able to articulate it and relate it into like the models that were discussed. You talked earlier about the stool. Like I really enjoyed the stool and some of the other analogies that they make. So I think the articulation of leadership is huge because you might think you're a leader, you might have the demonstration skills of being a leader, but articulating it might be the obstacle a lot of people have. I think the other thing, and this is not to get any sympathy or anything, but I'm going to be a father in February, so understanding where all this stuff comes from, like the early education. I have no education on early education or teaching K through 12 or anything like that. So some of the reading and just seeing the problems that they have with the younger generation, the really children going through education, that helped me, like as a future father. I thought it was pretty cool. I was like, okay, I could speak to this. I could understand this. This is how I would have done things, or this is what I could learn from it.
Boy, you are going to start a whole new journey soon. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So others.
I agree with that. I think it brought a lot of things to the conscious level that I did subconsciously. And I think it was Caleb that just was speaking. It allowed me to speak to some of the things I was doing and reinforce it. But it also made me realize that there's so much out there that I don't know, and things that I've been trying, just going out of my comfort zone. Acting first, as opposed to sitting back thinking about, a theory or something, but putting it into action first and then modifying it on the fly. That was one of my big takeaways. Yeah,
you said something that all of you need to really think about is that it brought to the surface for you, the tacit assumptions that we have about what leadership is or whatever it is, and that it's now you're becoming aware of it. And that's very, very important. And particularly, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what your next course is going to be about, because that awareness is so critical in understanding who you are. And that's what's very important about this program, is to get you to really look inward to who you are as it relates to this concept called leadership. So yeah, that's good that you're aware of that, and that has been brought to the surface for you.
I think for me, in my previous life before a teacher, I was in the business world. And so I've studied a lot of this I had a master's degree in management. So a lot of this was kind of reminiscent of what I've already learned, just in a different sector. And so I've worked on the administration management side or business side of a university. And of course, now I've flipped over to the faculty side. So I see things a lot differently in the university than in my view. I feel like the university, because I work in higher ed, is split between two camps. You have the management admin side, which I've been on, and now I'm on the faculty side. And it's very different worlds. And so I feel like in some ways, having this class to mirror with my business side helps me, because I can see both sides of the story. Mm-hmm. But how do you get those two camps? And this will be something that I'll have to keep asking myself. How do we get the two camps to see each other's side? So that, I think, because some of the problems we have really can be fixed if people will just look to the other side. Not just numbers, not just bodies, not just education, but rolling it all together. And that's going to be, for me, the biggest obstacle as I go up through my, when I decide to leave the faculty and go back into upper management. But it'll be very different being a faculty higher ed upper management than being, a manager.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're using the term upper management as opposed to upper leadership. And I think that's one of the distinctions of what Heifetz and Linsky and Gresswell have been talking about in terms of making sure you have a consciousness of the difference between leadership and management, because they're different. They really are. And I think what you're saying there is kind of interesting. And I know, coming from the K-12 environment and being a superintendent of schools for many years, that my first foray into higher ed, it was like, are you kidding me? It was like moving into the Byzantine Empire, because I never saw silos so thick, as opposed to, and there are obviously in the structure of K-12, but at a university level, it's kind of an interesting thing, because I think ego is a driving force in terms of higher ed, more so than it is in other types of organizations. And again, that's my opinion about it, just from my experiences over almost 50 years now working in different organizations.
And we're always charged with staying in our lane, or, staying in your silo. Don't venture into someone else's silo. But so it's a conundrum, because they want you to be interdisciplinary and to be good team members, but you have to stay within your swim lane. So it's crazy.
And I also have this question, and I don't know if anybody else thinks about this, and I don't know why I think about it, but do you ever wonder how in the world some people get put in leadership or even management, in whichever, how they even get there in the first place? Because they obviously have no clue what they're doing, and, everybody else has to do their job for them.
It's the Peter principle.
Yes.
Peter principle, right?
Yes, it's, as someone said it's what it is, the Peter principle.
I think it's pictures of their boss.
Yeah. Well, you rise to your highest level of incompetency.
What does that say about us?
That's been the statement in the past around the Peter principle. So, it's kind of interesting you're talking about that, as and I'm not sure if you've mentioned this or you're thinking about it, but, the ethics, and I think I've given you a couple of videos to watch about the ethics of leadership and ethical behavior within that. And the reason I'm bringing it up today is that I don't know if you had a chance at all to watch any of the funeral today of George Bush. It was very interesting to listen to the eulogies about him and then seeing the living presidents sitting in a row and what the nature of what leadership is about, and then the degree of leadership both within the presidency and after the presidency, and how it's looked at is something I think we all need to think about as it relates to that question of, is a leader an ethical individual who leads by example, leads by allowing for the moral development of an organization. And I think that that's a critical issue that is confronting all of us today as we deal with, the nature of what it is about. And I'm hoping that as you move through this course or this program, that you keep in focus the concept, again, of leadership management, but particularly what's the nature of leadership. And I think if you read in the Senge book, particularly that the origin of that word comes from the sense to cross over the threshold and to die. And meaning that as you cross over, you let go of the old in order to allow the new to emerge. And particularly next quarter, when you get into looking, and I'll talk about this in a couple of minutes, when you get into this concept of theory U, that's gonna really stretch your thinking about what your own personal leadership development is, not your management style, but your leadership style. So anything else about this? What are you discovering right now? Where are you around it? Obviously, it's surface assumptions. Anything else around that concept?
I think really quickly, one of the things that I got especially out of the Fullen book was that you shouldn't really be as scared of leadership as a lot of people are. I especially liked his idea of kind of getting started, the ready, fire, aim kind of theory. You don't necessarily have to have every T crossed and every I dotted, and you've not, mulled over this ad nauseum. Getting to action is more important, and then getting feedback, correcting, and then moving forward, and kind of that iterative cycle of, it needs to start somewhere. You can't just keep preparing forever. You actually have to get to work.
Yeah, and that's why the archetypes really are powerful tools to look at, because they give you a way to visualize basically what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And the original book that we used instead of the adaptive leadership field book that you have now was the Heifetz and Linsky Leadership on the Line. And that really delved into why leadership is dangerous and what it does. And it's basically on a lot of what you said, because our tendency is sometimes that because of personality style or whatever, is that we're afraid to make a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is the death knell of, if you have that fear of making a mistake, you'll never grow.
Yeah, I related to that. And the other thing that I think is really important is that you have to be able to not only make mistakes, but you have to, in being an advocate for something, you have to be able to create that shared vision so that the team feels ownership as well. Whereas I think I used to go too far off the end and do too much of the work myself, and then it became my project rather than the team's project. So making a conscious effort to try to back off so that in future work at the college I'm at, that people feel like it's their product, not my product. And it's taken a bit of retraining
Yeah,
for me to do that.
that is so critical. What you said is that the ability of and if you think of leaders, whether you're in a political environment or leaders that you've worked with before, is that generally the ones who are what we'll say good leaders or good examples of leadership do what you just said, is that they make you feel part of the process.
Yes.
And that is so critical because, and I know, like, for example, in the world of the superintendent, the longevity within a position nationally, I think is about 3.5 years. And it might even be less than that. And the problem with it is that, and I don't know if it's in schools that learn or whatever, is that what happens in leadership is that many boards, and I'm sure it's even true in the corporate world, is that they have the image of the leader as a hero, and that the leader takes on responsibility for everything, and that the leader has all the decisions, has all the answers. And that the problem is that now we understand that in a hierarchical, model, that, yeah, that's what it is. But in the emerging, new types of networks within organizations, that's no longer true. And that what the leader's job is how to create and foster the networks, and getting those networks to collaborate and to do the work. And that's what their role is all about. It's not doing the work per se. And that's a hard thing for a lot of us to think about, because in superintendency is, and I know, I've had success as a superintendent, I've had failure as a superintendent. And I had a contract bought out because one of the places that I was in they wanted me to come in as a change agent. And so I started doing change agency stuff, but it was like, whoa, blew them right out of the water. And how to deal with that. And at that particular point, just because of where I was, I wasn't aware of it myself on what the mistakes I was making in relationship to all the mistakes they were making. And that awareness becomes very, very important, to understand to nurture the space for people to make mistakes, to encourage people to do that. And not to encourage people to make mistakes, but when mistakes are made, it doesn't become a blame game. It becomes, what do we learn from that? Because we collectively created that situation that happens. And that's why those, again, the archetypes are very good tools to getting people to understand that. So I'm just, I'm just sharing that with you because it's something you need to think about as you move forward. And then the other side of it is, and again, I'll go back to the funeral today. What was sticking in my mind is how people were just talking about that George Bush was the last actually president that served in that greatest generation. He shot down in war and he experienced all those things, etc. And that now we're into a different population in relationship to, like, you have millennials and you have Gen X, and now there's new terminology, and that your role actually now in leadership is that even though you might be part of one generation, your ability to understand another generation is so critical in order to make things work today. So it's something I just want you guys to think about as you look at your own development over time and in the organizations you're working in right now. Okay, so anything else about this? So hearing none, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I think this is the next slide, yeah. So what I want to end up with really quickly is just to make sure you're understanding the scope of what you went through now and what's coming up around the core leadership components. And I showed you this in the beginning of the course, is that really with 800, what you're experiencing there is this idea of understanding what a system is, what change process is. But again, as I've always said to you, the most important thing you've got to understand as you leave this particular course is that structure shapes the behavior of people over time. So it just does. It shapes behavior over time. And that the more you go deeper into the structure of using the metaphor of the iceberg, is that the deeper you're into that you get down to the assumptions that are driving your system, and you understand how those assumptions shape the structures, and then how those structures shape the behavior, the daily routines. The more you're aware of that, that's going to give you great leverage in understanding how to make change or to make an organization function better. So that's very important. And the other two things then that come out of this is basically the dance floor and the balcony. So when you tie that into the metaphor of the iceberg, and then you think about, the dance floor and the balcony, that ability of a leader to be in the dance floor so you can understand the complexity or dynamics, that you're then able to jump above it so that you can see the broader picture and get people to understand that picture. So those really, at the end of this course, the number one thing, as I say, structure shapes behavior of people over time, and then you make sure you understand how to move through the dance floor and the balcony. Those basically are the two things that you should take out of this, this course as you move forward. So moving forward now, what you're going to go into is EDUC 845, and you're going to be exposed to Theory U. And you're going to be exposed to the work of Otto Scharmer. And again, these are not theoretical models. System thinking is not a theoretical model. What it is, it's a structure of thinking to give you a way of looking at that. So when you go into 845, you're going to be exposed through this book that you get, the Gallows book, which is going to have all the gurus in it. The book's about this thick. It's got, 30-some chapters, very short chapters, but they're going to be people like Warren Bennis and people of that nature who talk about leadership and what it is. But you're going to use it in the context of Theory U, which is going to give you the tool now of how to really dive into the mental models. And so it's going to teach you how to get rid of the downloading, which is the habitual way we function daily, and many times we're not even aware of it, and how we can increase our seeing and our sensing that through conversation that will let us let go of the past to let the future come through. And it's a very intriguing concept. And from the point of view, as I said to you before, is that from your research, so remember I said to you, the iceberg's going to be a pretty interesting model to think about your dissertation. So the event will be whatever you're going to study, what the problem is. So your lit review will be collecting the patterns of behavior and data, and then the structure of it will be the structure that you use as the researcher, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, mixed method, phenomenological, whatever it might be. And then the underlying assumptions will be the assumptions that you bring as a researcher. So I want you to just keep that in mind about how you can use that structure. What Theory U is going to give you is the way and how to collect data, especially qualitative data, because you're going to get into conversation. You're going to learn how to let go of your own assumptions in order to hear what another person is saying, to develop an empathy for their point of view. And that when you're able to do that collectively, and you'll see when you're doing co-sensing and co-creating in a group, that then what you're going to learn about is this idea of open mind, open heart, and open will. And you'll move into going up to you on how then you can create new possibilities for the future. So for example, some of the things you say, like, well, I'm working in a place that's just loaded with silos, and it's so difficult to get people because we're told we have to stay in our lane, even though they tell us to be, cooperative across lanes and stuff like that. Well, what Theory U is going to give you is the framework for, okay, how do you begin a conversation and where do you begin the conversation? So that's going to help you quite a bit to look at that. Now, most of your theory U, and I don't think, I was going to have you guys, I think, next quarter, but I think you're going to get Dr. Bureau, who has retired. He's an adjunct now, but Ed and I were some of the primary movers of developing this EDD program. So if you get Ed Bureau, you're going to get really a good individual that really understands this quite well, and he's a very good learning facilitator. So you're going to mainly concentrate on the left side of the U. Where you're going to understand the going up the right side of the U will be in 801, which is the creativity and design thinking course. You're going to spend 10 weeks in a team building possibly new structures for learning across all ages. You're going to put design thinking to work, and you're going to draw upon what you've been learning in 800, 845, your 804 for evaluation, those particular courses. And so what you're going to learn about is what design thinking is about, which is, you define a problem, you develop empathy. Now, why the develop empathy is extremely important is because one of the things about going down the left side of the U is, how do I become empathetic to another person, or how do I get the group become empathetic towards different points of view in order to allow possibilities of the future to come about. And then what you'll learn about is ideation, prototyping, and how to test that out. All the design thinking material is underpinned by the work of David Kelly and his brother, who were the founders of IDEO, which is a major design firm in the United States. But what's very interesting that has happened to their design firm is that they're doing now social design, working with social organizations to come up with prototypes to deal with human issues. And they're also the founders of the D School out in Stanford. And if you know anything about the D School, that's a highly integrated cross-disciplinary group that looks at coming up with solutions for many problems around the world. So that's kind of what's going to happen to you over the next 2 quarters. You might see me again in 801. I don't know yet if you'll have me for 801. But that's the sequence of courses. So any comments, questions about that? So you're going to have even a thicker book to read in 845 with Otto Scharmer's book. And again, Scharmer and Senge were buddies and worked together, so you can see the sequence. Okay? So if there's nothing around that, how I just want to end basically is just to say to you, happy holidays. Enjoy the break, because actually it starts right after the holidays. You're back in the grind again. So that's it. And I wish you a really happy holiday season with your families and loved ones, etc. And this is the time, what they generally say, you can put anywhere up to 10 pounds on. So be careful out there. So anything, any concluding thoughts or anything?
I just want to say personally, thank you for picking up this class. Yeah. It's been really good. It was,
Yep,
rough start, but really appreciate all the time and effort you put in.
Yep. Well, anything for Ken. So I said we've gone back. When we had the memorial service, I got up there and I said, "Geez, oh man, I've known him for 49 years. It was a long time." It's just like, whoa, So it gets you to think about your own, as I say, mortality when things like that shock you. But yeah, he was a great person, and it was a honor to be able to take over for you guys, and I hope I lived up to that expectation. So that's it then. If nothing else, I will stop the recording and bid you all adieu, and I will be the last person on.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.